Something I'd like to talk with you about today is a piece of information that I use with almost all of my clients, and we normally talk about it in the first or second session. This information is about how our brains, our nervous systems, process information. Now, you might think it's very straightforward. You might think, well, I can think clear thoughts and I have an idea of what I should do, and it's your brain power and your willpower that conquers everything. Not so fast. What they're actually finding in neuroscience right now is that our brain works very differently, and it's actually very different than you'd expect it to, especially when you're under stress. So let's break this down. I'm going to teach you a model, and you can do this with me. I encourage you doing it this way because when we embody our knowledge, when you can gesture it, when you can kind of play with it, that's one of the ways our brain's really good at remembering things. If it's out there in abstract, goodness, it's like trying to do math. Like 17 times 32. It's hard to play with. So this model, I believe, is from Dan Siegel. I should reference that. I'll put that in the notes down here. So this model is your brain model. So give me your hands like this, take your thumbs, roll them in like this, and your fingers over top, and then bring your knuckles together. This right here is about the size of your brain inside your head. So take a moment and check that out. Kind of cool. So we're gonna talk about it in 3 layers. This model, if you poke it too much, it falls apart, just like any model. There's some interesting things happening in neuroscience, but we can talk about that another time. For the time being, we're gonna talk about 3 different sections of your brain. So here's the top. This part is what you see in all the pictures. It's the wrinkly part. And it's pretty cool because this is everything that we give, that gives us a sense of the luxury of being civilized human beings. This is where we think in language. So if English is your first language, that's mainly happening right here. If you know another language, if you're dreaming in another language, for example, my first was German, that's happening here as well. It's the logical part of our brain. It's the part that says ABC connections. If this happens, then this happens. This part of our brain's processing that. Now, one of the cool things is when we talk about if this, then that, if we talk about consequences, if we talk about time, that's what this part of our brain is really good for, right? So these wrinkles matter a lot. It's the only part of our brain that knows time, and that's important. We'll come back to that later. So this part of our brain develops last. It's actually developing well into our 20s. And it's one of the weakest parts of our brain, and that's really good. Biochemically, it holds the least amount of charge, and that's important. So let's say, hey, we got some stress coming along. What happens? We pop our lid, we flip our lid, right? This part of our brain just lost a tug of war biochemically with this part of our brain, and that's important, okay? They've done MRI studies with people where they're looking inside their brain, watching blood flow, and the blood's actually draining out of this part of your brain. It's not entirely gone, because that's how your brain dies, but it leaves enough that this doesn't function properly anymore. This part of our brain is really slow. It takes about half a second to a second and a half to get a full thought. If you think about an Olympic race, well, the difference between first and third is usually less than a second and a half. And it's usually less even than half a second. Like half a second matters a lot for survival. Your nervous system knows that. This part's slow, kick it out of the way. We need to react. We can't think about things. So we're gonna talk about this part of our brain now. This is the limbic system, the emotional part of the system. But more than that, it's also the pack animal part of our system. This is where we think about our tribe, our crew, our clan, our people. This part of our nervous system sees connection. It sees, hey, somebody else is feeling happy, maybe I can feel happy. They're feeling afraid, well, what do I need to be afraid of? They're feeling anger, well, do I need to be angry too, or should I be afraid, right? It's processing that information long before we're even thinking about things. This part of our brain also processes sensation. Do I have an upset tummy? My skin's crawling right now. Am I sleepy? Do I feel really cold? Do I feel really hot? That's going on in this part of your brain. And for reference, your eyeball would go right here at the end of your thumb. It's roughly the shape of what the inside of your head looks like. So this part of the brain has way more electrochemical juice than this part. And if they get in a fight, this part always wins. But guess what? This part of the brain holds even more. And it's the most important part of our brain, because without this, these two don't matter at all. This part, our brainstem, covers our heart rate, and our ability to breathe, and our level of alertness. So this part of our brain's super important. These two work together to keep us safe. If we're not safe, thinking clearly doesn't matter. We need to get safe first, because thinking clearly is a luxury. Now this matters a lot when we're talking about things that you've been through, and maybe things that you and your partner are going through right now. If we're creating spaces that don't feel safe, and if we're in work environments, school environments, at home environments, personal environments outside, where we don't feel safe, and where we don't get a sense that we're safe, whether or not we actually are. If this part of our brain says we're not safe, you can kiss goodbye to this part, and we're responding as if we're under a threat. Our perceived reality is as close as we can get to working with reality, and that's how our nervous system responds. So, 3 parts of the brain: our thinking part, our emotional connection part, and our brainstem. If we keep these 2 happy, the work that we do here becomes a lot easier. And my job as a psychologist, as a provisional psychologist, is to help bring these all back together again, so that you can think clearly and respond clearly and feel all the feelings that you need to feel to live a life that's full, satisfying, and as happy as can be. My name's Tony Zerbin. I'm a provisional psychologist at Sojourn Wellness Group in Sherwood Park, and I hope you enjoyed this. Have a nice